it's always nice having podcast listeners on the podcast because
Yeah.
you don't know who's listening. Like I do these things and I'm like, maybe it's reaching some people. And then every now and then I hear like there's different people like coaches and researchers and stuff that are actually like listening and watching the podcast. I'm like, damn, okay, there must be something going on here that's okay.
It cuts through the noise for me. So I've got not a lengthy commute, but I've got a commute in the car. So it just cuts through the noise, and you've had some great people and practitioners, and it's the anecdote evidence they can come up with is outweighs any sort of experience I've had. So no, really useful, mate.
Mm.
Really, really good. Keep up the good work.
No, thank you. And and I know we mentioned before I started recording that Andrew Usher kind of recommended you to come on here, so which is awesome to have you here. But give us a brief background about yourself because I don't know too much about you either than what was on LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's a good question. I was thinking about this. How do you go about describing yourself? But I'm probably a coach first and an academic second. My full time role is I lead the masters in strength and conditioning at Nottingham Trent University. So I teach. Um, Aside to that, I coach non league football or non league soccer here in England. So we are step two in the non league football pyramid.
Well, what does non-league mean?
Yeah, so they're semi professional.
Okay, gotcha.
So we're 6 promotions away from the Premier League, so a little bit down the
No,
pyramid. But
okay.
anyone that works in non-league, it doesn't matter what level you're at, everyone still cares and they're still passionate. So I coach part time there, and I have just taken on the role of senior performance S&C coach for England boxing. So literally just about to start their sort of performance camps, which is my first sort of shot at it. So and in addition to that, I also work with a couple of professional boxers just in my not so relatively spare time, as my wife would say. So yeah, that's about it, mate. Really.
Awesome. It's a wide breadth of
Yeah.
of sports and coaching. So jump into the England boxing area. I know you're doing some research too, and we'll jump into that. Well, you've done a lot of research too. We'll jump into that too. But England boxing, you said you go into your first camp. It's kind of the first thing. I guess one of the biggest challenges that coaches face going to a new environment is what do you actually implement? What do you change? And what don't you, I guess, mess with? So, do you have a general idea of kind of how you'll approach that?
Yeah, so the chap that looked after him before me, Jordan, really nice bloke. So we've had a few conversations around what was done previously, and everything they have done previously is fantastic. So I'm literally not going to change much. The only thing I'm going to change is the isometric squat to the mid thigh pull, and that's only because my PhD was around the mid thigh pull. So it's just sort of second nature to me. But it's your typical strength and power assessments that you would, I guess, assess against any athletic population. And then there's some conditioning sort of tests with limited technology that we're going to try and roll out to get some idea of, I guess that conditioning sort of part.
Nice. So, you mentioned the mid thigh pull there. What are you specifically looking at from that test? Or maybe
Yeah.
explain the test quickly first, just for anyone who's not familiar.
Yeah, so the mid-thigh pull is an isometric test where the position should replicate second pull of a clean. So typically the bar will sit mid-thigh or just above, and the athlete will maximally pull isometrically or push for 5 seconds, and you get force time. And I've gone around the houses with what metrics are important and what do we do, and I've come back to just force and time. So let's get some time epochs that we think are important, and let's just get the raw force that the athlete produces at those time epochs and then express relative to body mass. So raw force, force over time and then relative to body mass is where we're at. And obviously a peak would be nice because everyone loves to have a max gauge. So typically that occurs 3 or 4 seconds probably down the curve, which just isn't relative to sport and activities really.
Yeah. So, what are the timeframes then that you're most interested in relation to boxing?
Yeah, so it's got for me 100 milliseconds, and then anything probably 250 milliseconds there. Really, just to represent, I guess, slow and fast, crudely measures or starting strength, and then everything aside from that. And Lachlan James has done some really good work recently
It
with
does.
his 5 components of strength qualities. Absolutely all over that. It just resonates with me so much. So again, influenced by a lot of that work that he's done in that space, and trying to get that idea of what our athletes are producing, albeit in an isometric capacity, is just useful for us.
Yeah, here's a really good little graph showing the shared variance. What was it? Of peak isometric force and dy- rate of force, like early and late stage rate of force development.
It was like
Yeah,
68%, or it was some of it were like massive, wasn't it? And I was really shocked by that, which again gives us more insight into what we should and why we should be collecting things, really. So
mm.
yeah, really cool stuff.
So then, say you get these 100 millisecond, 250 millisecond, I guess, force values for these boxes. How do you take that data and make it useful for your programming?
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming like you get the data. Oh, cool! Hit this many newtons of force at 100 milliseconds. Okay, like are you compare it between the squad? What's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always an interesting point because how do you program in it, or how do you make decisions off it, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. So for me, I've built up a bank of previous data from the boxes I've been in and around. So I've got that to refer to. Normative values expressed relative to strength is in the literature. So we would then benchmark against that. And we had a conversation yesterday, potentially looking at Z scoring some athletes within that sort of individual zone. So they have something to take away. We can track and then make meaningful changes based on some of that data.
Are you going to Z score across the whole squad or just individual?
We do the whole squad to start with because the individual we won't have the data. I think
Gotcha.
only 6 or 7 boxes might be returning, so I don't have previous data on them. But over time, we'll just build that bank up really. And for me, James, it's probably more the data is good, but it's actually getting in front of the athletes and coaching. That's the important part. So
Mm.
understanding them as an athlete and as a boxer and as a person will then drive some important conversations and assess what they actually want. The testing for me is just a supplementary added bonus, which we will use and obviously meaningfully use going forward.
Do you find there's general trends in terms of the isometric mid-thigh pull test uh, around boxers generally, or even your soccer guys? Like, are there just general trends that you see between the different sports?
Um, Relative to weight during a camp where a lot of weight needs to be lost due to the combative nature, some of your metrics will obviously go up. So, coming back to some of
Mm.
the papers we've done, we had a rapid weight loss period of 5 days just before weigh-in of the fight, and jump metrics went through the roof 2 days out. Now you have to think why. The athlete hasn't all of a sudden got better. It's just because of that massive rapid weight loss. It's made him lighter, which means he can express force. Similarly to the mid-thigh pull, what we've seen over the 5-week period was strength was declining. And I was on Gavin Pratt's webinar last week, and he talked about you can take two approaches to combat sports for performance: is weight loss or weight making versus performance. And 9 times out of 10, my experience with the athletes I've worked with, it's chasing weight loss. So therefore, you see these metrics decline in the professional sort of route, and then it's been like managing that expectation of the athlete because they want to know what they've done, but also as a coach going, right, how do we react to this? And that's been a real big difference for me. Soccer players just stay steady across the season. Typically, a lot of my work is done in youths, so there was a maturation growth element, which is also an interesting sort of thing to consider because if as a coach you didn't train your young athlete going through maturation, they'll get better anyway. So you
Yeah.
all of a sudden look good. It's like, no, it's just because you're growing. So when you've got that data and the coach goes, "Oh, look, great, you whatever," and you're like, "Well, he's just grown like, or she's just grown 5 centimeters over half a year. That's all that is." So it's being intuitive and understanding the data and your athlete ultimately what it means.
How do you said being reactive to that kind of strength loss during that acute weight cut phase? So what does that mean to you? Are you letting it just happens and you know out the other end they're going to be okay, or is there something that you're actually doing to try and change
Yeah,
something?
so we're not really proactive with it, so we are definitely reactive, and that's just because of the conversations we would have daily across that phase. I'll give you an example. Um, the athlete I'm talking about can jump easily 45 centimeters. He's pulling 44 newtons per kilo. He's a strong athletic boy, and he understands the science and he understands the numbers. So when he comes in with a 38 centimeter sort of decline across that 5 weeks, it's trying to understand why. We know it's because you're probably in a calorie deficit. So you have to re-educate and reinforce them good sort of behaviors of strength's important, power's important. Stick to what you're doing. And what we might change is looking at, I guess, a non-fatiguing dose of strength or power. So isometrics would come into play. We would look at plyometrics, but maybe low amplitude, depending on how he feels. We might flip that and go, right, let's give you a real high intense session, but really short, just so we're still getting that exposure of training and that dose, but also working with the athlete to go, don't worry, don't throw the bathwater out the tub just yet. So it's a real challenging sort of place to be, really, because they entrust in you, and which is why I'm a big believer of they need to be a part of the process, and that coaching element, which sometimes might get lost in our role, actually is really important.
If you're anything like me, you're short on time. Kids, family, work, training, and having to cook meals on top of that is just not going to happen. So I'm happy to announce Trifecta Nutrition are sponsoring the podcast. You get epic meals like these ones: turkey taco bowl, Texas barbecue protein plate. These are a couple of my favorites. But it means you don't have to prepare all your own meals, and it makes getting in good nutrition relatively easy. I've tried other meal delivery companies. Most of them are too high fat, not enough carbohydrates, or if you're getting kits where you have to cook it yourself, the portions for two is actually for one, especially if you are like me and you're training often. So if you want to take something off your plate and have meals like this delivered to your door, go down the description. There's a link there where you can order Trifecta meals. This is the performance line, which are higher protein and higher carbohydrate. And you can use code LIFTBIG40. You'll get 40% off your first order.
Yeah. No, I feel you there. With the mid-thigh pull data, so you mentioned like you're looking at like that fast, the 100 milliseconds, and I guess the longer 250 milliseconds. How are you potentially looking to train, I guess, rate of force development in those different time frames? Do you have like almost like a little bucket of exercises that you would put in? Okay, this is to develop that kind of fast rate of force development work, and this is kind of the slower side, or it kind of all blends together?
Yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
question. I think it's all intent. So we know intensity is a key to adaptation that we might sort of drive, and then it comes back to what are we trying to do. So I wouldn't be too concerned with, I guess, prioritizing 100 versus 250 and going, here's some exercises and buckets for that. What I would go is, what's the adaptation we're trying to chase? What's the intent that's going to allow us to do that? And then typically it's the movement complexity or movement velocity and the force expression within those. So, really heavy and slow maximum work would do X, and then your plyometric sort of element, fast, high explosive stuff would do Y. That's where we would probably sit with that. And again, coming back to the rapid weight loss element of boxing, it, the athlete needs to understand and buy into that process. So if they're not attacking, the heavy dynamic strength work with full intent, then you're probably doing no good. So I haven't really answered your question there, but it's just a train of thought. It's
No,
going,
no.
what are we trying to do really? And I wouldn't be too concerned with profiling off the mid-thigh pull, given the limitations it is as I guess, a tool and an exercise. Sometimes we can get carried away, can't we? Ultimately, they're there to box. They need to be able to box. So the mid-thigh pull is great, gives us some numbers, but yeah, I'd be skeptical to go, this is what I would do sometimes.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the adaptations in that you're looking at to try change in order to, I guess, improve some of those metrics, but overall kind of improve performance?
Yeah, I probably come from a typical strength background with that. So you sort of heavy max lifts to drive that foundation, and then we'll filter through to more explosive stuff. And it's the explosive stuff where, depending if the athlete's dialed in or not, with you as a coach, can get tricky because they're not feeling a pump. They're not necessarily under massive strain under the bar, and they're going, I feel fresh. And it's like, yeah, but this is your seventh hit this week of training. That's why, if you feel fresh, you're in a great position. Let's not overdo it. So typically heavy strength, and then roll into your more explosive power based sort of S&C type elements there. I
Nice.
did I did mess around a lot with complex training in our last two camps
Hmm.
with the athlete, because he was talking about not feeling reactive or explosive. So we almost went really heavy, complemented with some really fast reactive stuff. As we got closer to fight night, we reduced that heavy component and we supplemented it with some isometrics to still get that force expression, while sort of trying to maintain that explosive sort of power productive movements, really.
How did that athlete find doing the complexes versus, I guess, doing it in different straight sets?
Oh, I loved it. So
Yeah.
I guess the potential PAP effect might have obviously made him feel better, and the coupling of the heavy strength of the excitation of the neuromuscular system would make him fire, arguably better. So he found it really really useful.
How long did you rest between the heavy exercise and the lighter one? Obviously, because there's a bunch of different. I'm not gonna say theories. There's a bunch of different research that's like 3 minutes to 12 minutes, and then you
Yeah,
can
it's
rest more
really
minutes.
difficult, isn't it? Again, because we're not in a time efficient sport. They've got so much to do. Probably not long enough. So I tried to sit on him and go, right, let's have 2 3 minutes here. And he's getting itchy feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really difficult. Probably not as long as we did. It should is probably where I'm at
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah, it's funny as well, but like it's almost as if doing the heavy exercise, even if you don't rest long enough, if it's not super fatiguing, it's still kind of okay. Whether you see like a massive performance benefit on the side, I don't know, but it still feels good. So you get the
Yeah,
work done,
no,
I guess.
yeah, no, absolutely. And like that dialing into the athlete and having those conversations, he loved it. So even if there's a placebo effect and he's felt
Yeah.
we're on to a good thing, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
You mentioned obviously there's some conditioning tests you want to do with England boxing without much tech. Do you want to maybe go into that?
it's yeah, I've got the luxury at NTU, my real job. I've got everything. So you want, a VO2, we'll get all the bells and whistles. So I was like, right, what have I got? I've got a track and I've got some athletes and I've got a stopwatch. So now we've got to be creative, which isn't like everyone's doing, aren't they? So it'll be some assessment of a time trial. And a lot of this might be, I guess, Andrew's influenced me a lot around some of this stuff. Like, can we get a time trial that might give us an idea of some boxing terminology, going through the gears, being really hard, high intense, but long enough to induce some fatigue. And then we look at the decay of time over a couple of trials. So, going to sort of pitch 1K, 3K, and then 3 minutes by 3 minutes all out, see how far you can go with a minute rest, and just give us an indicator of some elements.
I like that. So what would be the goal out the other end with that kind of data in terms of influencing the conditioning?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I actually sent an email today. If we if we're not testing appropriately, we're just going to be guessing. So it's great we've got these markers of time trial performance, but what does it mean? Well, we can potentially take maximum aerobic speed, so we can calculate that. The limiting factor with that, as we all know, is maximum sprint speed. So why don't we collect some sprint speed data and then look at anaerobic speed reserve as a metric, which we might be able to use down the road and program. So there's one thing. The second to that is, can we get any heart rate data? So simple heart rate monitors, as most governing body sports are not that well funded at times. So that's probably a no. But if we don't know what's going on internally, we're still guessing, aren't we? So over time, I'd like to build an education piece around the boxers understanding the necessity to track heart rate. They can wear it for all their sessions. And then, as you know, with Andrew on here, like you can look at recovery kinetics, and then all of a sudden, we can dial in what the athlete needs, what they don't need, how they're recovering, and give them the peace of mind going into competition. You're in a good place, not just based on some time trial data. So there's a lot to do, but I'm really excited for it for sure.
Yeah, it makes it hard without a lot of the data, and you kind of like people love to test things, and you get some numbers, but then you're like, does it become actionable? And then it's kind of like from there, you're kind of like, well, is it worth testing then? And yeah, I guess you can test and see change, but then you're taking time out of training just to test all the time. And it's just a,
Uh,
it's just a whole clusterfuck around there.
Absolutely. It comes back to mid-thigh pull. So like your previous questions, like, am I actually going to bucket exercises or programming? I will do, but it's probably not as intuitive as like you just described there. So you have to be really careful with the athlete's sort of time. What they do really well at England Boxing is they create, most organizations would do this, they create individual development plans. So if I can get a plethora of data of the athlete and just give an overall athleticism score, i.e. the Z score, and then dial in some facets around, you need to develop strength, power,
Yeah.
speed, whatever it may be. It just creates a bespoke program for the elite amateur boxers in this country. And ultimately, that's what I'm there to do, is make sure it's individualized and they can perform maximally and they're the best version of themselves.
Yeah. And you mentioned obviously around the bespoke individual programming. There's obviously a trend, or at least maybe a push towards, a lot of people on social media parroting just the idea of, hey, just do the basics of basic. Like all the pro guys are doing, well, not pro guys, all the high level guys, whatever, are doing just the basics, and they do their sport that'll get you there. And then obviously when you're actually part of high performance environments, sure, the basics are there, but there's a lot of things going on that are not the basics. And yeah, basics will get the average person very, very far. But at some point, there has to be some we'll call it quote unquote advanced training. And with that bespoke training plan, I guess that's kind of leading down that road. It'd be interesting to hear kind of your thoughts around, hey, are we just squatting, pushing, pulling, and hinging, and that's all we're doing? Or is there, more advanced quote unquote methodology going into some of these individual programs because these guys are at a high enough level and you're trying to eke out everything you can there?
Yeah, so it's a great question.
Cool.
You're not going to like the answer because it all depends. So again, training age, movement competency, previous injury history, that's going to be the key to what we do. I think Jonathan Weekly and his group out of, I forget where he is in Australia, they've just done a review around training. And the biggest thing that come out of it was consistent training is the key to all. So, and by that, what I mean is, as long as we can get the athletes lifting and they're safe and they're moving really well, for me, we're nearly there. Then we can think about advancing it if they've got a decent training age, all the the important parts of movement to follow. We know imbalance is a big thing in boxing, so asymmetrical. So we would look at doing single leg work, injury sites, so wrists. Necks is another sort of contemporary issue at the minute, isn't it? How are we sort of catering for that? Shoulders, making sure, obviously the way they're hunched up all the time. Are we looking after the scapula? Them sort of facets where we can bespoke depending on the individual and then chase those performance gains after is probably where we will be. Sometimes we just got to keep it stupid simple, haven't we?
Yeah. Yeah. And especially with, depending on the athlete, as you mentioned, like a lot of them don't have huge training ages in the gym and things like that. But I guess as they become more advanced and things can progress. But I got a question for you in the live chat here from Famous Music. He's asking, what indicators have you found in the data that predict boxing performance, ability to perform well in later rounds, or any correlations that identify a punch exit?
Yeah, so that, I mean, if I could answer that, it would be amazing. So my long-term goal for research is to understand the deterministics of what boxing performance looks like. So how do you be really successful? That's really hard to do given the nature of it. So let's reverse engineer what we think the sport of boxing requires. You speak to anyone, punchers are born, not necessarily made. So there's an innate genetic ability to be able to punch someone to knock out. That means you're successful. But S&C, we know we can help improve that sort of pathway to knocking people out, shall we say, or winning the contest. So how can we understand that a bit more? Seth Lizansky's work is probably the real holy grail of where we are at the minute with that. How we advance that is really difficult, but you speak to most practitioners, they'll look at a reactive strength type metric. So whether that's modified RSI or drop jump RSI to give a level of explosivity, which they would then track and change. In addition to that, we might look at some conditioning performance metrics. So repeater sprint ability might be an indicator given the recovery kinetics associated with that. Typically, the athletes that I've looked at, that relative max strength across those time epochs is a good indicator. I think it gives a global expression of strength, and obviously it's a weight making sport. And then the reactive strength stuff, which we're trying to dial in a little bit more given some of the issues around the metrics itself. But again, that's probably a couple of years away from my sort of research perspective at the moment.
Nice. Yeah. And if anyone's interested in Seth Linetsky's work, he's been on the podcast 3 times, I think. If everyone scrolls back far enough, they'll find it. But interesting to hear your takeaways from, I guess, Seth's work, and maybe how it's maybe potentially influenced your programming or approach to strength and conditioning, and how it's maybe influenced just some of that, I guess, general boxing preparation.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So we've realized punch power or force is ground up. So he's a big pioneer of that. So lower limb, strength is really important, and the ability to transmit that force through a stiff core to the end of the fist is really important. An old colleague of mine, Fred Brown, Dr. Fred Brown, has adopted Seth's work. So he's created pendulum mechanics based on a teardrop punch bag, where he measures acceleration of the bag once it's been hit, and now he's been using that as a tracking tool. So we've got that in the
Oh,
background
cool.
bubbling away.
I'm saying, cool. Continue on. Is there any more you can share on that too?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to do a disservice here, but essentially, he's taken the pendulum sort of teardrop bag, pendulum mechanics, parameters on the bag. You know where the center of the mass of the bag is. As soon as you hit it, you do some maths, and it gives you sort of an acceleration force trace. So I've really, really crudely messed that up, but he would definitely be one better to explain it. But what I would say is we've collected the data for about 2 years now across a range of boxing athletes, and we're looking to roll that out, compare that to something a little bit more robust, and see if it can be a deterministic performance metric.
Interesting. I guess one of the limitations on tests like that, obviously, I'm assuming you're just standing there and just throwing a hard punch. So obviously, it's it's difficult to translate across.
Absolutely.
What's the plan? Obviously, you mentioned trying to make it more relevant, but is there anything you're kind of taking from that at face value that would be most useful? Are there any trends you're seeing just from that initially?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a discriminative tool. So we've had some random off the street people hit the bag and showcase some real good sort of I guess data. The challenge with that
Mm,
is, do they know how to punch properly, and are they hitting the target, and all the limitations you described. So what we might need to do in the future is motion capture what's going on. Now, anyone with a motion capture background, which I do not have, anything that rotates around the axis and disappears, i.e., a punch coming across, it's really hard to capture what's going on. But forward thinking, is that a possibility to be able to capture punching deterministic model based on ground reaction forces stand on a force plate, hitting something and video almost like Seth's work, but advancing it into a ring. So
yeah.
motion capture now is markerless. So is there an opportunity with a system like Thea, markerless system, of capturing that and then making that more meaningful for practitioners really to use? Seth will probably know, well, just definitely knows more of me about it than that, but that's where we want to get to. And if there's anyone who is a biomechanist out there who want to get involved, drop me an email.
Oh, perfect. It'll be interesting as well. Actually, I want to, before we go down the professional boxing, I guess, more kind of generalist or globalist training route, you mentioned that I think one of your students is doing some NEARS research. And
Yeah,
is that in boxing?
yeah. So Fred Beersley, shout out to Fred. I don't know if he's listening to this. A really, really good student, and he's probably the only one. He's the only one in my cohort that loves combat sports. So, I just gravitated straight towards him, and I said to him in September, "I said, you're my dissertation student." And then we found this old Mark One Portamon system, literally under the stairs at work, and I was like, "Oh my god, what is this?" It's got cables coming out of everywhere. It's got like a light sensor, and yeah. Anyway, old. Got on a call with Portamon. We were like, look, we found this. What's the crack? They've turned around and said, yeah, it'll work. Brilliant. Crack on. So Fred's taken it away. He's self-taught himself how to do NEARS research, and he's collected preliminary data last week. So he's looking at comparing training modalities, similar to Andrew's work actually, across sparring, heavy bag work, and pads. But he's collected it on the deltoid. So I know Andrew's
Mm,
like Rex fan. So
yeah.
he's gone more upper body just to have a look really and start that journey.
Damn,
Um,
that sounds.
yeah. So I mean, if we could get sensors all over them, it would be fantastic, wouldn't it? To understand localized, muscle, what's going on. But what he found was very similar to that of Andrew's work. So, sparring had the lowest punch count, but caused the biggest desaturation across the round. So again, it comes back to you can't replicate the sport, do the sport. So yeah, he's getting his teeth stuck into that.
It's super interesting. It's interesting that at least the preliminary findings are very similar in terms of those outcomes. I think it adds more evidence to the fact that you can do as much pad and bag work as you want. And then, as you mentioned, sparring is a different beast. I mean, same with any sport, really, right? You can drill as much as you want outside of the sport, but when you come into the chaotic environment of what's going on, there's just so much more going on that it is more intense regardless. I mean, even grappling, grappling's the same. You can drill, you can do live scenarios, but when you're actually, or I guess you can drill and etc. But when you actually go into live scenarios, then it's a completely different beast. And when you go into competition, it's even more intense. So I guess the question is, how does that play a role into how you prepare your boxes then overall, in terms of maybe some of that data? Does it change anything for you, or has it influenced anything you do in particular?
No, other than having, I guess, trying to have the correct conversations of what each session is set out to do. I've been fortunate enough to work with a couple of really good coaches who are really receptive to sports science, and I think they understand the importance of the practice we do. And it's trying to, I guess, educate them around, right, you're doing a heavy bag session. What does it look like? What are you trying to achieve? Okay, you know what you want your athlete to look like. Right, how are we going to do that? And then that's where then conversations can kick in. Again, I'm not full time with the clubs, and it does become, I guess, a challenge. But educating the coaches to understand why they're doing and what they're doing it for is where that information would help.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So you've had a couple of professional boxers that you've been training for a while. It'll be I think will be valuable for the audience. You don't have to share names or anything or any personal data on this, but it'll be interesting to know. I don't know if you're able to maybe share like almost like a case study of like kind of how a general, maybe a program would look for one of these boxers, maybe further away from camp and closer to a fight, just to get a general idea of how that's set up.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, James, I've been on a journey with it myself. So it's probably about 8 years ago now. Maybe how old am I? Oh, I'm old. Maybe 9 years ago, we first started with one of the first professionals, and it was a journey together. Fortunately, he is an athletic specimen. So you give him a weight, and he looked at it, and he just superseded everything we could expect him to do. So a lot of the strength work was foundational max strength work away from camp, and then moving into more explosive stuff again. And then we added in some plyometrics. As his training ages got older, we've then looked at, I guess we took advantage of his concentric strength capabilities and went, look, let's overload eccentrically. So we did a lot of extenuated eccentric loaded jumps. We looked at microdose and isometrics where we could, and really dialed in on expression of force that he'd developed over 3 or 4 years. And traditionally, it is you push, you pull, you hinge. Then we took him single leg. But he also suffered with like a back injury, so he loved Bulgarian split squats. Absolutely loves them. The challenge we had is his legs blew up from a.
He loves Bulgarian
from
split squats.
honestly, such a weird guy. I mean, he gets hit
He's
in
a
the face for
psycho,
a living.
man. He's a
Yeah, he
psycho.
gets hit in the face. Yeah, he's psycho. Um, but what was really good with him, he was just always dying to learn. So he'd always chuck on like an Instagram post and send it me. What, Rhys, why are we not doing this? Or, what about this? And it was just really good for his own career. He really took ownership of it. Um, Conversely, I've had some pros that aren't like that. And as much as you try and educate around the gym sessions and the importance, just didn't buy into it. And lo and behold, some of them athletes haven't been as successful as they could have been. Um, and then you've just got the ones which I guess everyone probably had experience to this. They just do their own thing. So I've had it all. So the biggest challenge for me is the old running. Try and come away from long steady state running and that sort of education around that.
I'm going to go into that in a second. Let me just write that down so I don't forget, because I've got a couple of questions in the chat for you before I come back to the granular programming stuff. So first question from Christian. He's asking, what are your favorite plyos for boxing?
Well, that's a great one. Probably not the ones the boxer likes. So I love, so if we think about what are we trying to achieve, and is that reactive explosivity? So any sort of depth jumps, I'm a real big fan of, and it's coaching the cue in the correct way to get the desired adaptation. So making sure they're not spending loads of time on the floor. Skater pogos or lateral bounds, I'm a real big fan of. I think obviously boxing isn't just that way. We also need to move and pivot. And then sort of the jump rope stuff might take care of itself. I know there's some people in for jump rope and there's some people out, depending on what the calf complex is doing. But yeah, them two would be my biggest things. And then obviously
There are people against jumping rope, you saying?
I heard someone a couple of weeks ago going, someone was doing a low amplitude assisted band jump, essentially replicating skipping. And I heard someone just say, well, what are they trying to do? What is the point? And I was just like, okay, brilliant. There's many ways to skin a cat, so depending who you're asking what the point is. Yeah, we're never going to get rid of skipping in boxing, are we? Let's roll.
There's no need to.
Exactly that. So, yeah, that was an interesting thing. Not thought-provoking, it was just an interesting comment. And then, obviously, I love med ball work. So, there's a load of videos now out of, like, obviously, Fabio Wardley and what he's done with Danny Wilson around some of that rotational power, med ball throws. It's fantastic because it's trunk and lower body coupling, which is basically the sport theoretically. So brilliant. Let's try and express as much force as quickly as possible doing their movements. Fantastic.
Nice. And then he also has a follow-up question. How much emphasis do you put on forearm and hand training? Is forearm hypertrophy important for force transfer and injury prevention and punching?
Yes to all of it, really. We would microdose forearm work, whether that's grip work or flexion extensions with dumbbells across the week. And a part of that might be just building armor to take shots. So if you obviously protect yourself, you've got bigger forearm, bigger muscle mass, you're going to withstand punishment a little bit easier than said if you weren't. And then the boxer I worked with, he had bad hands. So throughout his career, we've had to manage his hands. A lot of grip work, rotational grip work is really, really important.
How do you balance that with boxing? Because obviously the hands are taking impact every day.
Yeah, so he had a couple of operations as well, which was always a challenging sort of time because his coach used to say he's getting itchy knuckles, so he's dying to hit something. So it was a case of like, okay, how can we take this opportunity to maximize his energy and put it into something meaningful? So we focused a lot on the lower limb power stuff, avoiding overdoing with hits, and the grip strength stuff was really important at that point because he'd stopped hitting, and instead it almost treated like a rehabilitation camp, let's say, around that sort of area. Yeah, really interesting.
So he wasn't doing much punching while you were smashing forearm stance. Gotcha. And then when he got back to it, then how did you kind of find that balance?
Yeah, just microdose. So at the end of so depending what he's doing in a camp or out of camp. So let's say he's strength training twice a week in camp is probably what we'd want. He'd microdose one or two of those exercises at the end of the session. And then the next day, yeah, he would, I guess, report how he was. And then over time, he's just built tolerance up to it. And he's fine now. Thank God.
That's good. You mentioned obviously the running long distance thing. Obviously, this is a soft spot for many, I guess, people on the internet around long distance running. And obviously, the main arguments you hear is, well, all the greats ran long distance, blah 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 blah. We're interested to know your thoughts on, okay, why are you trying to reduce or stop these, I guess, your boxers or these professional boxers from running so much long distance?
Probably undoes the good work that we're trying to do. So I'll give you an example. So one of the boxers used to run to the gym, do his 2 hour session, and then run home. And his home was eight miles away.
Holy shit.
3 mile round trip. I kid you not. Like honestly, when you unpick why, he was in the military, and his dad was in the military, and it was just a habit that he'd formed. And honestly, trying to change What doesn't help as well is that he had an engine and he was really, really well conditioned. But he just had one gear. He couldn't go through the gears, but that one gear was pretty fast and pretty intense. So in his mind, everything he's done has almost supported his boxing style, supported his career to date. So it's really hard to then change that mindset and go, we could increase your ceiling potential if you sort of dial back these runs. Don't run to training. Anyway, never happened.
I can imagine that's a hard one to change. But it's interesting that you mentioned how kind of supported his boxing style. I guess he was just kind of like a workhorse, like volume style fighter.
Yeah, 100%. Well, yeah, but one gear, so he could never go through and have that concussive knockout power, or he would just go 10, 12 rounds, and you're guaranteed same amount of punch volume throughout the rounds. To the point, it just reaffirmed what he'd done was good and okay. Not the fact that right, we could change this now, and let's dial in a little bit more hit work or sprint work. Let's really try to chase those adaptations that we know are going to be important for ground recovery, mitochondrial, density, biogenesis, all the nice things we know we get with that work. Let's try and dial it in. And he just still.
And it'd be such a novel stimulus. It would just in a couple of weeks, it would just be like drastic changes.
And that's the frustrating thing with him. It didn't help either. His brother was quite a successful long distance runner. You just got competing entities really around this long steady state stuff. And don't get me wrong, like I've used long steady state runs. So the boxer, the most successful one I've worked with, just liked it to clear his head and use it as a recovery tool. I'm fine with that, absolutely, because if that's going to give you a psychological benefit, thinking I'm doing the right thing, then crack on. And equally, because you have to make weight so rapidly and so drastically, if we reduce the on-feet conditioning, sometimes there's not enough calorie sort of metabolism going through. Sometimes they have to run. Yeah, I mean, in the ideal world, we would look at the hit sprint stuff. Sometimes I have used long steady state, but it's for a different reason.
Is there almost like a maximum ceiling per week where if you're trying to reduce it down, like, okay, this is kind of like where you see like that threshold of long distance, I guess, running work you wouldn't kind of go past?
Yeah, no, definitely. So for me, it needs to be less than an hour. So he would go on an 8K run on a Sunday and just use it as a recovery modality. And I just like, look, that's all you can do this week then, because we've got 3 hit sessions or sprint sessions. You've got 3 relatively medium to high intense boxing work, and we need some strength stuff. So let's not overdo it. I don't know if you've found this with your sort of athletes, James, but they just do not want to sit still. They do not want to sit.
I've got a guy that like, he's sick and he's like, oh yeah, I'll still do the sprints. And I'm like, bro, don't do the sprints. Or he's already told me after. It's like, oh yeah, that sprint session was hard, but I'm like sick or recovering from sick. I'm like, man, don't do them.
It's so frustrating, isn't it? And you're like, okay, brilliant. Now we just change the week accordingly. But yeah, it's fun and games, isn't it? They're a different beast, which is why they do what they do and we do what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Is I guess one of the arguments for doing more long distance work in general is, hey, I'm targeting anaerobic base, central heart adaptation, whatever it is, VO2 max.
Yeah.
How does that play a role into your overall conditioning? And are you still trying to gain some of those adaptations, maybe through other modalities or anything like that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a place for it, isn't there? But we probably lose the word long. So, let's think about how efficient we can be with our time. And then let's think about what modality, hit work or sprint interval training from off feet or on feet, what can we do there that long distance running does? Well, they're the same thing pretty much, but we know we get more bang for our buck. We get more time efficient costs with the hit and the sprint work. So why aren't we doing that? And, I guess Andrew's been a big sort of advocate for this. The sprint interval work, you get so much benefit for little cost. Why we're not doing that? And I'm not saying like, and maybe this is where I need to educate myself a little bit more, but I wouldn't chuck my training age novice athletes straight into sprint work, because a couple of things might happen. One, the intent might not be there. So if the intent isn't there, you're not actually chasing what we think we are. Second to that, you might put them off. they might not come back. And then thirdly, do we need some sort of central or systemic adaptation first to really maximize some of the sprint work? And I'm not saying we go out and do 40-minute runs, but is there a Norwegian 4x4, or can we dial in some 3x3s, or, fast 800s or 1200s, which is a different stimulus than just keep doing the sprint interval works? That's where I would start with the more time-based 3-4 minutes, sometimes 6 to 8, and then we dial it in once they've, I guess, developed that central systemic sort of approach to training, and then we'll go, right, let's get some real peripheral adaptations here and let's get you really good.
Yeah. I think people confuse or maybe don't understand the fact, like, you're still gaining a lot of the I guess aerobic based or central adaptation stuff from, like, say, long high intervals, like you mentioned there, just different pathway, but you're getting the similar outcome just with less work. And then the long distance work, how do you progress? Say that guy who's running 8 miles to and from, or 8K or whatever it is, to and from the gym, to continue progressing, he's going to have to either do that faster, which he probably isn't, or you're going to do more volume.
Yeah.
So how do you stack more?
Yeah, you can't. And like we both know, typically the literature is in cyclists. Well, guess what their sport is? It's the cycle.
It's like, yeah, 5-hour rides and shit on the weekends.
Absolutely, they can get the volume in, and their zone 2 or whatever they're at is probably my zone 5. Like, let's not beat around the bush here. Like, they're not, little old Rhys sitting on a bike having a conversation at 110 watts or 150 watts. They're producing, I don't know, 250, 300 watts, which, I'm struggling there, aren't I? So they're beasts, and we need to take into account what boxers do. Well, certainly I do. What do boxers do? They box, they fight. Right, how can we best condition them for that sport? And it might not even be running. I know sometimes that's a contentious topic. Like, why are you doing running? They don't run. We need some stimulus. Normally, I need to get the athletes I work with, they need to lose weight. So I need that on-feet element. So it is a way and a means of, I guess, making sure my athletes make weight, for one, and drive an adaptation for performance.
No, I have another question in the chat for you around strength work. So he's asking, are there any minimum or maximum loads that you try to stay above or beneath for strength work, like a level of split squat you consider strong enough, or a level of overhead press that you don't think it's worth to push past?
No, I think simplistically, I think if the athlete, what drives maximum strength adaptation would be, high sort of rep range, high percentage of load and low rep ranges, but it's all about that intent. So as long as my athlete is giving me rep ranges of 3 to 5 with maximum intent, I'm really comfortable with, regardless of what that weight is. And I think we need to come back to what our role is. It's not to do any harm as a coach. So as long as movement is really, really good and they look competent, stick as much weight or as little weight as you want in relation to, it needs to be 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. Let's chase that intent and get strong. That's probably where I'll be with that.
I think from I guess a general fitness perspective, like Jim Wendler's 5-through-1 really nailed that philosophy in terms of everything's real sub max, but move it as quickly as possible. And you get stronger just consistently over cycles, even though you're not even going near your max in those instances. So you're improving maximal strength, but again, it's the intent to move those loads quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you've ever tried it yourself. When you actually dial in and think about moving the bar and not just counting 1, 2, 3 and having a good time in the gym, you switch on, you focus, and we've all been there and we're away with the fairies listening to your podcast and, not really driving that intent, that maximum force expression, which is the key to what will drive ultimately maximum strength. And look, it's really easy and flippant for me to say that. Once they're making weight, we need to be careful of injury. They're more susceptible to all sorts of things within that nature. So we don't always go max. Let's drive a 7, 8 out of 10 in terms of intent, but we need to make sure there is a component of it. Isometrics then becomes our tool, right? Can we supplement, Bulgarian split squats at certain knee angles that we might associate with the sport for being successful of a punch? Let's try that single leg work under the bar. Let's reduce that risk of injury. Brilliant. Okay, now let's jump. So, there's ways of
Are you doing
around.
those split squat isos in like almost like a quarter split squat position, and then you're doing like a pull or like a push with the bar on the back?
Yeah, so I've always traditionally used a push because it removes influence of grip and sort of that element there, and the athletes seem to like it more under the bar with that quarter squat. It's probably less than a quarter. It's really minute. But then we'd mix it up. We do sort of pal-off presses for sort of core trunk sort of strength development, done upper body, but end range. It's really try and hold and press. I think sometimes it could be neglected in boxing, but pulling. Think about sort of latissimus dorsi and what they might do for the spine when we chuck. A jab or a punch sort of sort of stops that rotation. So we need to work on that pulling strength to be able to withstand that sort of transmission of force. So there's lots of things we can try and do really.
I mean, interesting if you're able to maybe just go through a general program outline for one of your boxes from warm up all the way through, and just maybe label some exercises throughout that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we do typical rotator cuff sort of warm up element. So we'd look at some banded work, your I's, your W's, or your Y's, just to make sure the rotator cuff's nice and warm. They would jump rope for a period of time, get that heart rate leveled up. For me, I would then start with the most complex movement that we want, so they're the freshest. So sometimes I've done some Olympic lift derivatives, and by that it's probably just a hang pull. So if that's what we're going to do during that block of work, we would do a hang pull. I would then always superset with a complex with this given athlete because he can withstand the load. So I might go really heavy hang pull, and would then get into some repeated bounds, 3 or 4, rest, repeat. We do maybe 2 or 3 sets. From there, I would then isolate the needs of the day. So let's say we're going for a lower limb focus. We would then go split squat. We would look at doing some split squat variations, and then I typically might superset that with some posterior work. So nothing too heavy, but just to ensure we're trying to look after that sort of backside sort of element. From there, we would look at, I guess, going through some lateral work. So I'm a big fan of like lateral plate holds. I just think that counterbalance at the end, the lateral lunge, just allows the athlete to drop in nice and deep. So we would look at that, and then we'd look after calf complex at the end. So potentially some heavy calf work just to try and chase that calf complex, and then we might supplement that with some pogos or, for a better phrase, some assisted pogos, even though they're apparently not great. So that might be a lower limb focus sort of session.
That would be like a day one, and then a day two would be more upper body focus.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then we took some trunk and core work in there. So I'm a big fan of pal-off presses. I'm a big fan of sometimes Zercher squats. So just that anti-flexion, holding the barbell there, that can be really cool. And then the upper body sort of element, warm up, shoulders again, make sure we get some injury prevention bits in there. And then we'd chase med ball sort of complex. So throws and slams with some rotational sort of component. Typically with the athlete I'm looking at, he's struggled with some shoulders, so I might go floor press for him. So a floor press to limit the range of motion, but we'll still get some good intensity in there. And then he might go into a superset with a chin or a pull, which are typically weighted. So I do them two together. And then arguably we'd then look after the shoulders. So he quite, again, they have some ownership on this, but he likes some like shoulder complexes, side, lateral, front raises. And then we couple with like some military press just to burn out and get that element there. So that's more him and his ownership on the program. And then we finish again with some trunk work, which could be some anti-flexion work, anti-rotation work, depending on where we are really.
How does that shift as you get closer to the fight in terms of, because obviously you have the weight cut going on, everything like that. Does exercise selection change at all, or is it mainly just kind of like the volume?
A bit of both, really. So again, we have to think about the injury and what we're trying to achieve. So at the start of the camp or off camp, let's say, you can have all the nice, pretty, all singing shoulder complex in there. But what's that actually doing for us? So for the upper body session, we would again make sure we're warmed appropriately. We would superset some med ball complexes. I would then look at either doing the isometrics if we're getting closer to fight sort of prep, maybe 4 weeks out, drive that maximum intent, and then we'd superset that with a plyometric push-up or a variation of a barbell throw. So now we're driving force through the isos, and then we're going to express it. Conversely, with the chin-ups, I still keep in weighted chins. I just think that that ability to pull really sort of heavy weight is important as long as movement's good. So looking after the scapula. And then again, we might chuck in more sort of med ball, this time overhead throws, to maybe include that sort of shoulder complex along with the pull. And then from there, we're probably at maybe some, I guess, wrist, forearm, maybe arm work. I was speaking to Gavin Pratt around this, bit different for grapplers. It's important to be able to pull. Sometimes in the clinch, that could be a limiting factor of a boxer. So are we actually strong in this pulling range? So again, we might give him a bit of an arm pump around the end of the session, and then finish off with some trunk work.
Nice. With your ISO, what obviously we talked about the quarter split squat one. What are some of your other variations you like to use?
Yeah, so a good one for me is the end range sort of floor press. So are they pressing away from the floor? And the thing you have to think about is, what does this relate to the sport? So are we going to get much adaptation that's transferable to the sport in like really close to your chest from a floor press, ISO floor press? Probably not. So what's end range doing? Okay. Where are we most strongest? Where can we produce our most force? It's definitely definitely not there, is it? It's going to be sort of away in terms of sort of length tension relationship there. So let's chase that. That relates to punch force and end of range, close to that, I guess, that high force sort of producing power. So there's one there. I have done obviously the Palloff press against an immovable, fixable sort of point. Again, really good for transmitting force around that trunk. You single leg calf. It's almost a sprinter sort of style where you single leg calf work. Again, we program some of that in as well. And these can be microdosed within the warm up. So there's times when we can do that. And there's times where we don't do that really. It all depends on what we're trying to achieve with where we are. And weight making with the athletes I work with is the biggest sort of limiting factor. I always say to them, if we can walk around, around 8% of fight weight, 10% ideally, we're in a good place because we haven't got to worry about making weight. We can just concentrate on performance. When they're not, it then changes.
Yeah. Yeah. Then it becomes that's the main priority versus the actual performance in the training, which is tough. But then obviously there could potentially be an advantage, or people at least perceive an advantage of making the weight and then obviously coming way back up and ideally being bigger than the opponent too. So what's the trade-off? What's the trade-off there? It becomes a little maybe challenging.
Well, the work we've done, that paper published with Fred Brown, Dr. Brown, we started camp 6 weeks out. He weighed 80, I got it here. He weighed 80.3 kilos at night. Started weighing, he got down to 69.9. So that's a 8% body mass drop. He then rehydrated for fight night back up to 79.4 kilos. So it's a 13.6% increase following weighing. So what that did to his metrics were returning to baseline. So he was privy to this study and what we found, and he says, "Well, my numbers are fine. Like, what's the crack?" What we didn't take into account for was any of the cognitive function, any of the conditioning elements that are important for fight night, any actual strength. This was all purely based on counter movement and squat jump. So there was a lot of facets there that we missed. But for him, he thought, "Well, my power's back to normal. I'm going to be fine." And that was typical behavior for him across all the camps we do. He's now moved up a weight, which is great. So hopefully he can be a little bit more natural, and we don't have to chase that weight making all the time.
What were some more of the findings of that paper? I haven't actually gone through it yet. What were you kind of looking at with that study?
Yeah, it's a big old study, so it's quite hard to get your head around. So we thought, how can we best capture what we do as practitioners to inform science? So we took a load of measures 6 weeks out. So we monitored cortisol, salivary cortisol, and IgA for immune markers and stress markers. We did mid-thigh pull, and we did counter movement and squat jump across 5 weeks. Leading up to fight week, we scrapped the mid-thigh pull given the risk, and we just concentrated on jumps daily up until weigh-in. And then fight night, we were in the changing rooms, we had our force plates, and part of his warm-up routine, we captured some jumps. What we found was there was a slow deterioration of metrics 5 weeks across camp. He's making weight, calorie reduction, not great. Rapid weight loss, which occurs a week out, where he loses most of his weight, which is his water weight. Day 2 before weigh-in, his numbers went through the roof. His jumps were PBs, and it was great. What had happened was he just reduced his body mass, so he was able to jump higher. But he didn't make weight until the day after, and then there was a decline in performance, as we'd expect. And then rehydration, fight night, fight day, he returned to baseline. So it is that typical story we might see in here of decline over camp, maybe a bit of a spike when his rapid weight loss kicks in, further decline when he's really, really sweating out. And then when he feeds, he returns back to normal. That's crucial. Like, we can't not consider the cognitive function, the psychosocial element to it the psychological element around how he actually feels. He always looks dead on the scales. And I'm a big believer of, like, if you don't feel comfortable 24 hours out, how are you expecting to go in and perform? But yeah, I wouldn't know. I'm not a boxer.
Nice. And I have one more question for you to round up this pod that's come through the chat. Are there any big differences in either strength or conditioning that you use for higher weight classes, or is your programming just based on individual abilities?
Yeah, it's probably a bit of both, actually. So we know that the heavier sort of athletes, off-feet conditioning is probably where they would like to spend most of the time, just because it's the ability to get into the red zones. Sometimes they see it as a limiting factor. So one athlete we had in previously just didn't run at all. So everything was off feet. So I think that's we can really dial in some sprint interval hit work then, and really focus on chasing that rather than, I guess, running. Tyson Fury's a big runner, isn't he? You always see him plodding around, which is fine for him. But yeah, typically big athletes we would take off feet. And then again, it comes down to, like, we need to dial into what they want. So the behavior of, sort of that self-determination theory of making them a part of the process will drive motivation to do what we want them to do. So if you give them a bit of autonomy, right, what do you like doing? Brilliant. Okay, I can work with that. Let's try and dial in what we're trying to chase, and let's work together. They're more likely to do that than me just going, right, do this. I don't know if they like that. If they don't like it, there's a good chance of not going to do it, which creates that we need to know the individual. So it's probably yes to both of them.
Perfect. That's everything I had for you, Rhys. That was a solid pod. Where can people find and follow you and keep up with your work?
Yeah, I'm not on social media, so I'm pretty useless for that. I'm on LinkedIn, which, yeah, they can find me on there. My Nottingham Trent University website, and I write. This is really corny, but I really love it. I write for Boxing News, which is a monthly subscription magazine in England. So I do an article column each month in there, called Fight
Nice.
Lab, which is just it's late term, so I don't have to worry about science and just give my perspective on things. So I write that monthly. So I guess there's 3 places there.
Cool. Awesome. I'll link up your LinkedIn anyway down in the description for anyone who wants to give you a follow and send you a message or anything. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing everything.
Yeah, no problem, James. Thank you for the opportunity. And I should have had more examples rather than trying to think and get on
No, you're
going.
good.
But yeah, thanks.